Okay, I'm going just to have a look at these two guitars. One I've bought and I'm returning is the Alvarez 8-string baritone. I'm returning it because there's an issue over the way that the saddle, the bridge, the nut is all configured, which does some very, very strange things with the strings, including spacing the octaves and wounds here with 5 millimeters between them, like 4 in a row over the space of 15 millimeters. You've got literally 5 millimeter even gaps rather than having the strings together. The spacing of the bass strings is very odd, and again the middle wound strings, it's very, very hard to tell. I'll try bringing this close to here because this is why the guitar has gone back, in fact, to the excellent music shop which supplied it, Anderton's. I don't know if you can see, but it really is quite strange to have a spacing of strings like this. That's because of the positioning of the bridge pins here on the tailor and on also on a guild, which I've also got here. I don't have the tailor here because I can't afford that, but they're on those. They're further over. They're at a different position. They're the other side of the other two pins here. They sort of move over to that side instead. There's a reason for that. I'm going to try to explain. I don't want to get too involved, but this is how the Alvarez bridge is set up, and you'll see that the wound strings, which would be the strings you play singly if you're playing fingerstyle, I'm trying to get the light there to catch them and show that the wound strings are in a very unevenly spaced position. However, having said that, the Alvarez is a really beautifully resonant guitar. It's a standard jumbo case size, which is an advantage, which means it actually fits in a standard jumbo case like my Loudon case. It fits straight in a Loudon O-size case. And also it has a 27 and very nearly 3/4 inch scale, which is quite long. And the guitar I'm going to compare it with in a minute, the Guild, only has a 27-inch scale. That makes a difference to the tension and kind of, shall we say, the flabbiness of the strings. They're the same gauges. They're the same 16 to 70 D'Addario set. And that's fine, they're good strings. But on the slightly longer scale, they have a little bit more tension, and that makes the basses sound a little bit better on the Alvarez. This is the Alvarez anyway. I've got it tuned down to A at the bottom. That's because I normally tune my bottom string down one anyway, and it's not a bad test of a baritone guitar, because you might use it in a baritone dadgad equivalent or do something like that. You might want to down tune it below the baritone pitch for certain reasons. So to have that, as you can hear, the Alvarez is a very, very good accurate guitar generally. So is the Guild, which I've also got here. But this issue with the string spacing was causing me obvious problems. It actually improves the way the strings play down at this point because it increases the gap slightly. Conventional string spacing, which you like a 12-string guitar, leaves them a little bit close together. And because you're bringing your finger over this way, basically hitting the wound string first, they are not arranged in Rickenbacker fashion with the wound string below the, so the wound string above the plain string. They have the plain string above the wound string, as in normal 12-string manner. That means that your finger comes over here and it has to kind of reach over to press the unwound string down. And if you just sort of plonk your finger on top of it, you can get quite a dull result. But or even get that if you're not careful, because your finger is being supported by the wound string and it's not getting the pressure over onto the unwound string. Bit geeky maybe, I don't know, but it just causes a little bit of difference. You have to reach your hand over a bit more and finger it just a little bit differently than you would a single course. And it's a little bit worse on the Guild than on the Alvarez, because this weird spacing right close to the bridge does leave them a little bit further apart there. However, the position of the bridge pins indicates that the Alvarez was designed, when the design was set up, to be strung in Rickenbacker fashion with the trebles below the wound strings on these doubled courses in the middle of this 8-string baritone guitar, which goes unwound, unwound, wound and unwound octave pair, wound and unwound octave pair, then obviously 2 wound basses. It's a great combination. It really makes a lovely guitar to play. And this is a very nice fingerstyle guitar as well, the Alvarez. Now the Guild, which I have got instead of the Alvarez, simply because it's got actually a better setup in many ways. Now it's a much more expensive guitar. It's sort of I don't know what the list price difference is, but effectively I paid about £150 more than the Alvarez for it, although the Alvarez was a very good price from Anderton's, £100 less than some other dealers. And by the time I'd added a hard case to it, of course it wouldn't fit in any of my existing hard cases, it had made it much more expensive than I wanted to buy. Now this is the Guild. I'll bring that towards here. Now I have fitted brass bridge pins in this. I've done that almost straight away because some of the notes, particularly the unwound trebles, were really quite dead, and brass bridge pins can improve that. There's a minor problem with this guitar. As you can see, the wound strings are now much more evenly spaced, so when it comes to finger picking and you're trying to hit the wound string first, whereas the Alvarez was wildly unevenly spaced because of the way that the pins and the strings were arranged, with the wound strings coming off the back pins instead of off the forward pins, the Alvarez was very uneven. This is evenly spaced, and those pairs are much closer together. I'm sure you can see there. They're much more like a conventional 12-string. However, that does make them quite a little bit worse in terms of having to deal with this. That's okay. Oh, I'm not doing too badly. It's very, very easy though it's even easier than on the Alvarez to get a muted treble pair of the octaved strings. So, but I can it just takes a little bit of concentration on playing to avoid getting that. The sound is warmer. Probably fuller, but even though it's got a shorter scale by 3/4 of an inch. It sounds, if anything, slightly more bassy. It's got a little bit less harmonics and treble in that. It's still got a very resonant body, but the resonance is at a lower pitch. It's got a laminated, pressed, slightly bowl sort of back. You can see that there. There's no back bracing, whereas the Alvarez has a traditional construction with bracing. Have I made the right decision? I'm not sure, because I rather like the echoey sound of the Alvarez, which is much more open and airy. The Guild it's still got a lot of air in it because of that sort of central 12-string feel on these, but I don't know how easy it is to tell the difference on a recording like this. I can only just sort of play a few. It's quite a gentle guitar, but then I'm playing both of these gently, deliberately. There are other ways of playing these instruments. I've got one of these picks here with the little spring in it. I'm not sure if I like them yet. The Guild's got a lot of headroom. You can really drive it and it's not going to cause any problems. It just gets louder. This Alvarez has a little bit more echo, resonance, natural reverb, whatever you want to call it, but it's a slightly more muddled sound as well. It's not quite so clear for singing over, I'd say, because it does tend to be a bit dominating. This one I like the Alvarez neck better. It's got a slight V profile at the back towards the nut end. The Guild neck is a strict C profile. It's okay, but it's not quite as nice. The Alvarez neck is a little bit nicer. The Alvarez neck goes up to 21 frets. The Guild only goes to 20. There's another issue which affects the sound of the guitars too. You can't. Sorry, I've got this hidden behind me, but if you take the distance from the front of the bridge to the center of the sound hole, on the Alvarez it's got the bridge set further back on the lower bout, and that distance is 15.5 centimeters on the Alvarez, which means that when you're playing over the sound hole you're that much away from the bridge. On the Guild it is 13.5 centimeters, so it's effectively 2 centimeters closer to the bridge. You're not playing in exactly the same position, and with the Guild having a shorter scale, that's not quite an equivalent shift. So had the Guild had its bridge positioned a little bit further back, it might have pushed the neck back a bit, but you've got to think about how it's been done. Alvarez has managed to get 21 frets into that space, and the body is more or less the same size. The Guild is a little bit bigger. The Guild has a very large headstock. That makes the tuners very well separated. They're traditional sort of open gear tuners on the back. They're very well separated and they're very easy to use. The Alvarez has much smaller tuners and they are a closed back, smaller buttons, different gearing I think slightly. They're just a little bit closer together and they're not as easy to deal with, but it fits in a case. Whereas the Guild requires a case which virtually has a 12-string headstock, because this is a very, very big headstock. I'll say something more about that. The Guild headstock weighs a lot more physically than the Alvarez. Now, from experience with other instruments, including German Walzer, the Portuguese guitar, and things like that, I know that if you make a very light headstock, it can increase the apparent just ring and resonance of the strings to the body. I think there's a lot of guitars being made recently which have got quite interestingly slim tapering headstocks, particularly in the electric field, and some in the acoustic field, where I think the makers have realised that you can alter the sound of the guitar significantly by the weight of the headstock and also by the distance which the strings travel here, which affects the overall tension, just much the same way that when you get a guitar which has a floating bridge and a tailpiece, the overall distance that the strings go has quite a big effect on string tension. It might not seem that it should, but it does. And the same applies at this end. It's subtle, very, very subtle indeed, because it's very small differences, but it all affects the overall sound of the guitar. And I think that the Guild, I think, comes out with a greater purity as far as I'm concerned. I think it's a slightly more fundamental tone. I think they're both as accurate in terms of intonation, and the actions are very, very similar. You really couldn't pick between the two. The playability overall, I would just give the edge to the Alvarez. But that's the playability here, not the playability here, because that weird string spacing does cause some odd things to happen. I can more or less play the Guild as if I would any other sort of guitar. It's a bit harder to get used to doing something. I've only had this guitar now since last night. Harder to get used to doing something like that on the Alvarez because of the strings not being equally and evenly spaced. So they're not where you expect to find them. And I'm trying not to look at the guitar. I'm going to enjoy playing this guitar. It's now got a case so it can go places with me. The Alvarez is going back home to Anderton's, the dealers, who have given me a full refund on it because they agreed that my comments about the strange spacing of the strings and the bridge configuration, which couldn't easily just be adapted. I would only need to have a new nut cut to change it, say, to the Rickenbacker type stringing, which might have been a good idea, but I'm impatient, so I didn't. I couldn't cut a quality 8-string baritone nut with the 12-string spacing in the middle. I couldn't get those measurements accurate enough. I think in the factory, I'm sure they have a template which helps them get these slots in the right position, because it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. Even a mandolin knot's not that easy, and when you've got 70 gauge at the bottom and you've got these octave pairs in the middle, actually getting that spacing right is difficult. Guild really do have the spacing right here. I'll try to catch the light there a bit better. Maybe I'm doing, catch the light and then you can see it. Yeah, you can probably see there that the main strings, which are the ones really catching the light, the trebles and the main wound strings, they are all really very, very evenly spaced. Comments about the electrics. The Alvarez has an LR Bags with element pickup, a 3-band EQ. It's got the usual kind of controls on it, and a tuner, and it sounds excellent. It's really very, very good. It's mounted in the side of the guitar, which I don't necessarily like, but it's practical. You get immediate access to it. The Guild has a hole in the guitar, but the hole in the guitar is for the battery and jack. I don't know if I like that, but it keeps it away from your strap pin. And it's a Fishman pickup in there with a 2-control preamp mounted inside the sound hole. And the 2 controls are just one volume control and old style tone control like you get on guitars from 1965. Probably a capacitor sitting in there just literally rolling off highs and doing almost nothing else. That may be slandering Fishman's electronics, but I suspect that just sticking a capacitor across it is the easiest way to do it, as in the early electric guitar tone and volume controls. It's easy to get at, the battery's easy to change, but there's no tuner. So I had to get Merchant City Music in Glasgow to give me a free tuner. It was worth all of a tenner, which, considering the cost of a guitar, was not really a huge discount, but they're a very nice shop. And they had the guitar in stock, and I was able to sit down and try it carefully. They got it all ready for me. They got an amplifier as well if I wanted to plug it in. And they had dug out a Sigma case, so I've got to put up with the fact that there's Sigma on the case. But the Sigma case is a very good price, and it's one of the very few which will actually fit this sort of almost 12-string jumbo size instrument. So that's it. Odd differences. I guess I'm being a little bit geeky to talk about the order and position of the bridge pins, the order of the strings, and the cutting of the nut and everything and how that goes. But it makes a huge difference in an instrument like this. And I honestly don't know why Alvarez, who have a lovely instrument there, somehow managed to get it peculiarly wrong compared with Taylor, who also have an 8-string baritone, which also has a second row of offset bridge pins, but they are kind of offset in a way which makes the basses run almost in a line and the trebles run almost in a line, overlapping. And their order and position and spacing of strings is the same as on the Guild. So if I was to pick up a Taylor, it would play the same, whereas the Alvarez doesn't. And it plays very nicely when strummed, of course, because you're not trying to hit the strings exactly or do anything like that. It also, in my opinion, did play nicely fingerstyle, but I prefer to have something where I've got the predictability of strings where I know what position they're in, and they're in a similar position to my other guitars. It's a 44.5 millimeter nut on the Guild, 45 millimeter apparently on the Alvarez. They look and feel almost identical. Okay, thanks.